we're about to get going. Sorry, guys. YouTube is giving me some problems. Okay, we're about to get going. Sorry, guys. I wonder if there are two streams in YouTube where this is on right now. Let me just check that, and then we're... Nothing there. All right.
The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show, and hope you're having a good week so far. I certainly am. And today we're going to do a part two from yesterday. So today we're going to do Socialism part two. We're going to do, well, yesterday we do why it was immoral, why socialism was evil. And today we're going to do why it is, it's impractical, why it doesn't work. And of course we all, in a sense, those of you who understand the morality know that if it's immoral, it is going to be impractical. But let's go through why exactly it is impractical. So, we are combining yesterday's show into kind of a little series, and all in prep for my, debates on socialism versus capitalism, which are coming up here really shortly, in about a month. In the middle of September, at the University of Maryland, the University of Texas in Austin, and at the University of Colorado, Denver. I will be debating socialism versus capitalism with the author of the Socialist Manifesto. So we'll be covering all of that. So what is it that makes socialism unworkable? And you could say, well, if it's immoral, it's impractical, but that's a complete floating abstraction unless you're willing to concretize that, unless you're willing to show how its immorality is actually impractical. And what is it about its immorality that makes it impractical? All right, so yesterday we talked about the fact that the fundamental moral problem with socialism is it rejects the moral right of the individual to pursue his own happiness, to use his own judgment in pursuit of his own life, and that the system of socialism, the socio-economic political system of socialism, demands morally and politically the sacrifice of the individual to the group. And various socialist thinkers, various socialist movements have placed at the center of that sacrifice different groups. But in modern times, basically that group is the needy, although I would argue in America today, the democratic socialists pretend that group is the middle class. Everything is about the middle class, because that's where the voters are, that's where the votes are. But when you look at actual policies, the policies almost always geared towards the needy and the expansion of the needy, the growth of the needy to ultimately include the middle class. So socialism demands altruism. It demands a negation of the negation of individualism and the individual. And thus it is an immoral system. It places human sacrifice as the fundamental issue in morality. It says that your life is not yours. You are to serve whoever the needy happen to be. Your property is not yours. Your property must serve whoever the needy must be. If you're a doctor under socialized medicine, your time is not yours. You must serve whoever is needy at the price that somebody determines, some bureaucrat determines. You are not autonomous to make decisions for yourself because your life is not yours. I mean, the great revolution that is America, the great achievement that is the founding of America, is the idea that the individual's life is his. That you have the right to your own life. The pursuit of the rational values necessary for your life, for your happiness. Your life does not belong to a king. It does not belong to a tribe. It does not belong to the state, the president, the council, the committee, the witch doctor, the pope, God. At the end of the day, your life is yours. Now, at the end of the day, that is the reason it doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work is that socialism rejects individual autonomy. Socialism rejects individual judgment. Socialism rejects the efficacy of the individual to make decisions for himself, the morality of the individual making decisions for himself. Socialism and all forms of central planning don't work because they replace the individual's mind. They replace the values of the individual. They replace the pursuit of the individual's happiness, the use of the individual's reason with the wisdom of the majority, with the wisdom of a central planner, with the wisdom of an authoritarian dictator. Fill in the blank depending on the type of socialism you adhere to. The Social Democrats, we want to vote on everything. The socialist, I'm probably going to debate, and I've debated other socialists, like the real committed socialist today. I debated a real committed socialist at a university in England. Was it earlier this year or late last year? I can't even keep track anymore. But it's available online. It's available on this YouTube channel. Just put capitalism, socialism. The socialists are debated at Lafayette College. Their particular version of socialism is not that the state should own the means of production. They don't want big state. They're anti-statist, supposedly. But they want the state to impose a system by which the workers, own the means of production. Now, how do the workers run and own the means of production? Do they hire professional managers and CEOs to run it for their sake? Well, no, of course not. That would defeat the purpose. CEOs are just parasites, according to Marx. They run it democratically, but I don't know, by the will of the workers. And basically what they're replacing is the knowledge, expertise, specialization of individuals, managers, capitalists, CEOs, with the supposed knowledge, the wisdom, supposedly, of this mass, of a group. The group that is supposed to somehow decide how to run a factory. But they all get really excited about this. This is a passion for them. This was how a kibbutz in Israel was run. Individual decisions didn't matter. The most you could do as an individual is vote What kind of industries do we want to go into? What should we plant next season? What new vegetables or fruits do we want to grow? That all went to vote. Every decision went to vote. And all you could do as an individual was vote. You couldn't decide, even if you were an expert, even if you had specific knowledge, even if you actually were the most productive person in the room when it comes to this particular area, you had no bigger vote, no bigger say than anybody else. And as a consequence, in Israel, the kibbutz, which is probably the closest version to a socialist utopia that these people have ever come to, ever, was an economic basket case and failure. The kibbutzes never succeeded economically. They were completely dependent on the state to subsidize them. A state that had private property elsewhere could tax them in order to subsidize a socialist utopia within the state of Israel. If you look at commune after commune after commune, they all fail. Because the group cannot replace individual decision makers. Because the group does not know what's good for me, does not know what's right. In a business, for example, knowing how to do marketing requires real study, real expertise, real knowledge, real focus, a real skill set. You can't replace that expertise by vote. To run a business, to be a CEO, requires an immense amount of skill, knowledge, focus, hard work, expertise, specialization. None of that can be replaced by a vote. Yes, this is a scene in Atlas where 20th Century Motors decides everything by vote, and they collapse. They go from the most successful, I think it was an auto company, to a complete and utter disaster. This is the company that John Galt originally worked for. And he went on strike when he saw the concretization of the morality of altruism, the concretization of the social structure of collectivism in this particular factory. Because what was the factory run on? The factory was run on need. Who needs what? Not on ability, not on good ideas. And at the end of the day, what does need break down to? It breaks down to the need of my group versus the need of your group, and who can manipulate, who can figure out how to gain power to get their needs fulfilled. And that's what every socialist government always falls to, and that's what modern America has fallen to: pressure group politics. Companies talk about running a company for the stakeholders, which is a kind of form of soft socialism. Who are the stakeholders? Well, there are lots of stakeholders. Everybody's a stakeholder. Everybody related to the company is a stakeholder, from suppliers to bondholders to shareholders to employees to customers to everybody. But how do you do that? On what basis? How do you make decisions? Whose priorities comes first? I'll give you an example I used to give to my students. I guess a relevant example in the age of Trump. So we used to take this question. Okay, we're all stakeholders. Oh no, we're all the CEO. You're all the CEO of a company, and we have to make a decision about whether to move a plant to Mexico. It turns out that from a pure shareholder wealth maximization, if you take into account everything, the drop in labor productivity, but the drop maybe in cost, the increase in transportation costs, but the less regulations. If you take everything into account, from a shareholder wealth maximization perspective, it makes sense to move to Mexico. All right, but we don't want to run the company based on just shareholders. That sounds unbelievably selfish and self-interested. So we're going to run it for stakeholders. We're going to be socialist about this. We're going to let everybody have a vote. So what I used to do is ask them who the stakeholders are. And we used to put it up on the board. all the stakeholders in the company. Shareholders, bondholders, suppliers, employees. And then the question was, employees in the current plant, but would you consider the new employees in the potential Mexican plant potential stakeholders? Community. Well, is the Mexican community a stakeholder? Well, you can get debates into that, right? All the different stakeholders, the government, the CEO, management, everybody. And then we'd go and do an exercise. Okay, is this good or bad for these stakeholders? And is it good for them short term, and is it good for them long term? And you put little pluses and minuses, and some are bold and some are weak, and lots of plus and minus, and the board is then filled with pluses and minuses, kind of people who benefit from this, or people who lose specifically directly from this. And now you say, okay, you're the CEO, and you're trying to maximize stakeholder wealth. Make a decision. Do you count up all the pluses and count up all the minuses? And if there are more pluses than minuses, you move. If there are more minuses than pluses, then you don't move. How do you make a decision? Do you let everybody vote, including the community, including future employees in Mexico? How do you do the vote? Who gets to decide? And that's socialism. That's running a company based on socialism. You can't decide. There is no right answer other than who gets to decide in the end. Well, the people who are going to make the most noise. The people who are going to upset the cart the most. The people who are going to bang on the table the hardest. It might be the unions. It might be shareholders. It might be bondholders. It might be, who knows? I mean, you could use altruism and see who is suffering the most, who is the most needy, and then it would probably be the Mexicans. But they're Mexicans, so we don't count them. But then it's probably the workers, certainly not the capitalists, certainly not the bondholders, certainly not the shareholders, certainly not the suppliers. There are other businesses. They're not suffering. So it has to be the workers. But at the end of the day, it's whoever pounds on the table the loudest. You cannot make decisions under socialism. Except by some kind of majoritarian system. And majorities cannot replace experts. But not experts as in central planners. Because the fact is, experts cannot replace individual decision makers. Experts can't tell me what my values are. Experts can't replace my reason with their reason. Experts can't replace my life with their life. They can't make decisions for me. They don't know what my utility is, to use an economic term. They don't know what I should be buying, what I should be producing, what I should be making. The beauty of a free market is that individuals who are free to make decisions for themselves, buying and selling freely in a marketplace, actually send signals through the pricing mechanism, through what they're willing to buy and at what price they're willing to buy, that spread through the economy to help other people make decisions about what should be produced to satisfy the values of the consumers, or of what producers should produce to create new values for the consumers. Because most new things are values that are created for us that we don't even know we value until we see them. But that's the beauty of an economic system. All this happens without a central planner. Now, that doesn't mean without planning. You still need entrepreneurs, you still need CEOs, you still need marketing executives, engineering executives, people who plan. But plan based on information they get from us, consumers, workers, engineers, scientists, who are feeding into an amazing system that through prices, not just the prices of goods, but the prices of labor, the price of labor, the price of expertise, combine to give us the data, to give us the knowledge on how to produce the goods that are going to be valued by our consumers. And mistakes happen, and sometimes we produce the wrong goods. Sometimes we have an idea and we think something will be of value to people and it isn't. But it works pretty amazingly beautifully. And once you take that away, Once you take it away, it's not that the central planner or that the democratic system is not smart enough. They're not. But that's not the point. The point is, it's not about being smart. It's about being unable to replace my mind. It's about being unable to replace individual decision makers in the context of their own life valuing the thing that they value for the purpose of their own life. That cannot be replaced by a majority. It cannot be replaced by a central planner. It cannot be replaced by a supercomputer. It cannot be replaced by anything, because it's only you making choices about your life using your reason that can make those. And you're going to make mistakes. And somebody could stand on the side and say, you're making a mistake. But only you can recognize the mistake and change it. Nobody can live your life for you. But what socialism tries to do, is live my life for me. Now, the consequence of that is destruction. The consequence of that is starvation. The consequence of that is death. Even if you exclude the violent death of the gulags, just the starvation of Ukraine, the starvation in Mao's China, the starvation in Venezuela today, or just the poverty of truly social democratic countries, like I was just reading today, like Argentina or Greece, heading in that direction, relatively poor already, or any country that actually practice social democracy, democratic socialism, becomes poor. Maybe they don't starve because they haven't gone all the way, but they become poor. They become poor because they've extracted individual decision-making, and they limited the individual decision-making. How did they limit it? Through two mechanisms. They limit individual decision-making. One is by stealing our money, reducing the amount of capital available to us, reducing the amount of funds available to us to both consume, invest, produce, so that we can do less with our life because we have less capital to do it with, less money to do it with, whether it's on the consumption side or, more importantly, I would say, on the production side. And secondly, by regulating and controlling, and therefore, again, limiting our options, telling us what we can and cannot do. Take healthcare. Take healthcare. Socialized healthcare, on the one hand, makes us poorer by taxing us huge amounts. And secondly, limits our choices in terms of what is available to us, in terms of treatments, which doctor. It takes away our mind. You cannot now actually choose which doctor to see. You see the doctor that's assigned to you. You see the doctor that's available. It takes away your judgment about your health care. But it's worse than that, because it takes away the doctor's judgment about what health care to give you. He is now constrained by what the government approves, by the list of treatments for your disease approved. Today, much of it is called evidence-based medicine. Now, that sounds great. We all want evidence-based medicine. But really what evidence-based medicine is a list of pre-approved techniques, treatments, procedures that the doctor should choose from. And anything outside of this is not going to be covered. But where do you get the innovation? Where do you get the geniuses who are going to do something new and do something different? Right? About 2 years ago, I've had a lot of back problems throughout my life. I had my first back surgery when I was 19, massive surgery. I'd lost basically feeling in my leg below my knee. And I was 19 years old, which is pathetic and ridiculous. But it's what happens. I had massive surgery, cut me open. I had 2 massively ruptured discs. They had to clean that all up. They sewed me back on. And since then, I've had back problems nonstop. And at some point, I literally had to have two of my vertebrae fused because one of my discs just fell apart and was non-existent. And then a couple of years ago, I was having back pain again. And it was pretty serious, and I couldn't sleep. And, you know, if you watch some of my talks from that period, I'm kind of always uncomfortable because my back is killing me and it's really hurting. But I did not want fusion because, you know, once you start fusion, you fuse two vertebrates, you put pressure on the next disc and vertebrate, and then you fuse that, and then it goes like this. And by the time you're 70 years old, you've got one fused back. And that's not what I want. So I said to my doctor, look, I don't want fusion, but I've read that maybe what we can do is, how about you go in there, clean it up, take the stuff that's sticking out and pressing on my nerves away, but the disc is gone, he said. There's no disc there. We have to do something. And I said, how about we inject stem cells? And it's the doctor I really love. I mean, I really like this guy. And he said, you know, I've never done that, but there's no medical proof. It's not on the list of evidence-based medicine. I said, in other countries, they're trying this, and I've read about this, and yeah, it's unclear how successful it is, but you know what? I'm willing to pay the money, even though insurance probably won't cover all of it. They'll cover the part that cleans it up. They won't cover the stem cell part. I'll pay cash because I don't want fusion, and you know, I want to experiment. And the reason, by the way, the insurance won't cover it is because the government hasn't approved it. It's not on that list that the government approves. And he said, yeah, I need to look into it, the FDA, right? Because the FDA, you know, so we have to figure out which stem cells we can use, because the FDA approved some stem cells, my stem cells, from my body. We can't use fat stem cells because the government doesn't like those. We can't use this. Maybe we can use bone marrow stem cells. So we did. We landed up, you know, going into my bone marrow, sucking out some bone marrow, spinning it, separating out the stem cells, going in there with arthroscopic surgery, which is amazing, right? Cleaning it all up, then going in and injecting stem cells between my two vertebrae. And, you know, a year later, we did an MRI. And there was like what looked like a healthy disc between my vertebrae, when none existed before. It worked. I'm mostly, you know, I'll never, ever be pain-free on my back because my back's messed up from when I was 19. But I'm mostly pain-free. Certainly, I'm 1,000 times better than I was before the surgery. And the stem cells looked like they worked. I just did another MRI at the 2-year anniversary of this, or about a year and a half, and looked at it again, and wow, there it is. The disc is healthy. It's all lit up. Now, you could never do that in socialist medicine. He would only be able to do what the government has approved to pay him for. He couldn't just experiment, which is what he did with me. I approved it. We got the company that produces the machine that spins the stem cells. They brought it down that day. There was a whole number of people in the operating room because everybody wanted to see this, because it's pretty rare, at least, you know, in Southern California to do this. In Europe, it's more common to do this. And, you know, they did it. And I paid cash. And yeah, I can afford to pay cash. Yeah, I'm not going to sacrifice the fact that I've worked hard and I can afford to pay. It didn't cost a fortune. It was like, I think it was $5,000 out of pocket. And it was an outpatient treatment. I walked out of there that afternoon, went home. You know, it was amazing. Somebody asked if my back injury was military related. It certainly happened in the military. So I had the surgery during my military service, and it affected my military service. It's why I landed up in military intelligence in Israel. It's because my medical profile, I couldn't be combat soldier anymore, so I landed up in military intelligence. Anyway, this is freedom. This is the ability for me to do research, make choices, decide about a treatment. It's the ability of the doctor to make a decision, a choice, about whether he wants to do it or not. He could have said, you know what, you're crazy. I don't want to do this. And then I could have shopped it around, gone to other doctors, or I could have given up on it, but it would have been my judgment. Freedom is about individual judgment. Freedom is about individual decision-making. Freedom is about individuals using their reason in pursuit of their life. And what socialism does is it pulls the rug from them. It takes that away from you. And by doing that, it destroys whatever industry it's done it to. So if you look at medicine, you can't do that in the UK. Not at the NHS, maybe in a private hospital, maybe. You can't do that in systems where the government pays the doctor. Now, a lot of these systems, to compensate for that, have a dual system that allows some people, the very rich, not even the middle class anymore, only the very rich, to be able to go to private doctors. But it takes away that choice from many people. I mean, $5,000 not to have fusion on your back is worth it for, I think, a lot of people who are not as wealthy as I am. And I'm not super wealthy, but I'm wealthy. I've done well. And what is the reason why I should give up this ability to go to the doctor of my choice, to have the treatment of their choice, to try something new with my own money? I'm not asking you to fund my experimentation. I did it. I'm not even asking my insurance company to fund the experiment. Maybe they, for a completely rational reason, say, you know what? We're not covering this because we don't believe in it. But, you know, they cover acupuncture. They cover all kinds of, crap as treatment. But they won't cover, this, right? But that's absolutely their right to do so. But why should I give up that ability? Why should the insurance company give up the ability to make choices about what it would cover or not? And why should the doctor give up his ability to make choices about what treatment to give me or not? Because there's 10% of the population that are uninsured. There's a few people over there who are suffering because they don't have health care. It's because you must sacrifice, Yaron. You must sacrifice your mind. You must sacrifice your judgment. You must sacrifice your wealth. You must sacrifice everything in the name of the 10% who are uninsured. In the name of those people who might not have the same access as you do. You are nothing, Yaron. You are just a slave, a pawn. You are a meaningless individual. To be used, to be sacrificed, to be exploited by those who need. And it turns out those who need are everybody who happens to be less wealthy than me. So you can see how the immorality and the impracticality feed off of each other, and they're the same thing in the end. Altruism is impractical, therefore, and altruism is immoral. Socialized healthcare is immoral, and it's also impractical. It leads to bad outcomes for almost all of us. And at the core of it is this idea. The core of it are two fundamentals: altruism and the negation, which two ideas that go hand in hand, of course, and the negation of you as an autonomous thinker, choosing your own values, making your own decision. And the replacement of that with fill in the blank, the workers, the democracy, the state, the bureaucrat, the expert. Central planning is bad because central planning replaces my decision with somebody else's. Right? So, socialism is both immoral and impractical. Shouldn't be surprising. By the way, if you have any questions, I see some people have questions, you have to use the super chat feature for me to answer them. I'm happy to answer questions that you have, particularly questions about socialism. I want to start with that, and then I'll get some of these questions. I've got one question from yesterday, a super chat question that I forgot to answer, and I'll answer it today. And then I've got another super chat question already here. And of course, if you want to ask any additional ones, I'll be happy to answer them. So, further proof of the ineffectiveness of social democracy is just history and the world around us. the complete failure of every regime that has attempted communism, from the Soviet Union to China to Vietnam to Yugoslavia to Albania. All they resulted was those kind of communist regimes in death and destruction on a unprecedented human scale. Well over 100 million people. And they did, on top of that, of course, the oppression, the poverty, the filth, just the whole disgusting nature of life under those kind of regimes. And then if you look at socially democratic states, real social democracy. So Israel was really, to a large extent, a social democratic state, and probably the most successful one of all of them. And it was poor. It was poor when it didn't have to be poor. And in order to become rich, which Israel is relatively speaking today, it had to free up, it had to reject much of its social democratic past. It had to move towards more and more freedom. Or if you take a country like Argentina, do you know that Argentina, 100 years ago, was almost as wealthy as the United States, about the same. In 1913, the United States and Argentina had pretty much the same GDP per capita, or very close to the same GDP per capita. Since then, since 1913, Argentina has adopted a variety of different socialist policies, statist policies, social democratic policies. So the state didn't always own all the means of production, but it invoked socialism in that it owned the important means of production, it controlled the means of production, it regulated the means of production. Here's, by the way, a definition somebody had. I saw this. This is an economist-type definition of social democracy, not communism, but social democracy. Here are the 4 points of social democracy. Higher personal corporate tax rates and higher government spending. More worker protections, restricting the ability of companies to hire and fire, and less flexibility for companies to set wages based on worker productivity and to hire foreign labor. More reliance on regulations, more constraints on real estate development, more antitrust enforcement, and more state intervention in product markets, and a shift away from a shareholder-centric business model. More protections for workers and domestic industries through tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and more constraint on capital inflows and outflows. Now, by the way, based on that definition of social democracy, the United States is pretty close. Under Bush, Obama, Trump, suddenly Trump, Obama, it's pretty close to this, right? Trump added the tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but really, I mean, this is all the shareholder-centric, moving away from shareholder-centric. That's a big push over the last 30 years. Higher personal corporate taxes. Well, corporate taxes have gone down in the U.S. That's a good thing. So we moved away from social democracy with Trump on that one. Higher government spending. Moved towards it with Trump on that one. So we're kind of this mixed bag of a bunch of these, but not all of them, right? A bunch of them, but not all of them. Suddenly, all of these, sound like Bernie Sanders. They sound like Elizabeth Warren. They sound like AOC. I mean, that's social democracy. That's where they want us to head. Now, countries that have that, countries that have higher personal corporate taxes, higher government spending, more worker protections, restrictions on hiring and firing, less flexibility to set wages, all of this stuff that I just read you. Where do you think countries like that, how do they perform? Well, Argentina is a great example of that. It was as rich as the United States. Today, it's much, much, much poorer than the United States. There's a graph. So by the way, if you're interested in kind of these economics of freedom kind of issues, I highly recommend Daniel Mitchell and his blog. So it's called danieljmitchell.wordpress.com. danieljmitchell.wordpress.com. Highly recommend you subscribe. I get his stuff off of LinkedIn. You can friend him on LinkedIn, or you can just go to his podcast, his blog. He has excellent stuff. He always has great graphs. He always illustrates, concretizes well. You know, again, he's not philosophical. He's certainly no objectivist, and he doesn't deal with the moral issues. But on the practical side, he's one of the best out there in just describing what's going on, what's wrong with the stuff. He's almost always, I mean, I agree with him on 90+% of the time, which is very rare. Anyway, he has this graph showing over the last 100 years, since 1913, 105 years, by how much has an economy grown on a per capita GDP basis, that is on individual wealth. American wealth, for example, has grown, and I think this underestimated dramatically, by what the graph looks like, I'd say about eight times. 8 times, not 8%, 8 times over the last 105 years. Taiwan, which 100 years ago was an unbelievably poor country, has grown 41x, 41 times. South Korea, which was at the end of the Korean War, and well into the actually 1950s, post-Korean War even, was poorer than North Korea, has grown in excess of 30 times. Most of that just in the last 50 years, not even 100 years. Argentina, between 2 to 3x. Less than half of the United States. Today, Argentinian GDP per capita is well less than half of Americans. It used to be half. And why? Because they adopted all these policies. Social democracy. Oh, but you might say, wait a minute, but Norway and Sweden and Denmark, they are social and democratic countries, and they're rich. They're rich. And yeah, Norway has a higher GDP per capita than the United States, almost exclusively because of the oil. Sweden is a little below the United States average. Denmark is below the United States average. Finland is below the United States average, although Finland is quite a bit below. Finland is the poorest of those countries on a GDP per capita basis. But those countries are not socially democratic. Let's go through this. Higher personal and corporate tax rates. They have higher personal tax rates, but low corporate tax rates. All those countries have relatively low corporate tax rates. Higher government spending. Not much higher than the United States. More worker protections restricting ability of companies to hire and fire. Less than the US. It's easier to fire somebody in Denmark than it is to fire them in California. Less flexibility for companies to set wages based on worker productivity and or to hire foreign labor. Much more freedom to do that in Scandinavia than there is in California or in much of the United States. Labor laws in the US are worse, more restrictive than in Scandinavia. More reliance on regulations, much less reliance in Scandinavia. More constraints on real estate development, not sure. But I think there's less zoning and constraints, certainly than parts of the US. The big cities in the US where real estate prices have gone through the roof are some of the most constraints in the world. More antitrust enforcement, no. And more state intervention in product markets, no. None of that exists in Scandinavia or is at the levels of the US and Scandinavia. A shift away from shareholder-centric business models, nope. Not since I'd say not in the last 20 years, and not before the 1960s. These countries have been low regulation, low worker protections, shareholder wealth maximization models for public companies. And then the final one, more protection for workers in domestic industries through tariff and non-tariff barriers. Scandinavia is more free trade than the US. Certainly under Trump. More free trade than the US. So no, none of these companies exhibit the characteristics of democratic socialism. It's funny because when Bernie Sanders said that Denmark was a socialist country, the Prime Minister of Denmark came on television in Denmark and said, "We are not a socialist country. I want everybody to know that we are not socialist." And the funny thing is, that I just read an article about the new right-wing government in Norway. Norway's had a right-of-center government since 2013, for the last 6 years. Sweden is not socialist. They don't have a socialist government. They have, I think, a coalition between the right and the left, both right of center. Now, they're all too statist in my mind. They all redistribute wealth too much. They all have too high taxes that are way too high. But on these other issues, they're freer than the U.S. Freer than the U.S. All right, so countries that adopt socialism are basket cases. And the more socialism they adopt, the more consistent they are about adopting them, the more disastrous they are. You can look at this graph that Dan Mitchell provides in terms of wealth per capita, GDP per capita, and you look across the chart and you see the countries that are least socialist are the richest, and the countries that are most socialist, or the most statist, or the most state-controlled, are the poorest. No matter what the history is. Even if they used to be poor, if they've adopted capitalism, they become rich, like South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, even Japan, if you consider how poor they were once during World War II. And countries that used to be rich, like Argentina, Romania on a relative basis, so some of the countries that were rich before the Soviet Union took them over and where they are today, are poor today. Poor today. So we've run this experiment over and over and over again. Once in a while, when I debate these socialists, they'll mention a co-op, I think in Spain, that works very well. One co-op. One significant company run by employees in the world who runs okay. And I'd have to do research to figure out, are they subsidized? Who helps them? Or do they really run okay? One, as compared to the wealth, the unbelievable amount of wealth that has been produced globally by private companies and by relative free markets. All right, I actually don't see any questions about socialism. The socialists didn't show up on this. All the Bernie people who are, just trashing my analysis of Bernie Sanders on the Bernie Sanders video I released, are not coming to see my video on socialism and harassing me here. So the socialists are not in the chat session. Well, maybe they're being convinced slowly but steadily and systematically. There's always somebody, somebody will come up to me a year later and say, I listened to your podcast, or I listened to one of your shows, or I came to one of your lectures, or I came to debate, and I was the exact opposite when I entered, and you caused me to start thinking, and then I went and read books, and then I listened to some more, and now I think you're 100% right. I mean, that's the most satisfying thing in the world, and I get that regularly all the time, so don't give up. It's one mind at a time, we convince, one mind at a time. And yeah, the socialists have a huge advantage over us. Huge advantage over us. But, one mind at a time, and slowly we will win. All right, we've got a bunch of Super Chat questions. Let me take them by order that they were received, starting with the one I didn't answer yesterday. And the one I didn't answer yesterday was asked, this was the question: why is Apple successful without Steve Jobs? I mean, Steve Jobs was this genius, supposedly, right? He was this innovator. He was this visionary. He could see the future. And he was this amazing business person and creative person. And he died. And yet, post Steve Jobs' death, they seem to be incredibly successful in spite of that. And I think there are probably at least 3 reasons that I can think of for why that is. One of the things that Steve Jobs was brilliant at was hiring great people. was hiring great people. And you can see that from what's his name, the current CEO of Apple, which we'll get to in a minute, the current CEO of Apple, but also Johnny Ives and I'm sure a lot of the executives at Apple were people that Steve Jobs hired, and he was good at it. He was good at finding talent, and therefore Tim Cook, I don't know why that name escaped me. Tim Cook, who replaced Steve Jobs, but the whole management team, the whole executive management team, the whole upper echelon. Steve Jobs hired, and they turned out to be phenomenal, really, really good business people, particularly at their area of expertise. And of course, why did he hire Tim Cook? Because one of the geniuses, again, of Steve Jobs is the vision to see where things are heading. And Tim Cook is an expert on supply chain management. He's an expert on production. And this is the thing about socialism, right? Socialism denies there is such thing. We don't need experts in supply chain. We'll just vote on it. The employees will just vote on it, and we'll get the supply chain right. But Tim Cook that's his genius. He's not a genius at, the kind of products that we as individuals will love, like Steve Jobs was. He's not a genius of design. He's not a genius for that sense of design and sense of feel of how a product works and what it'll look like and so on. But he's a genius when it comes to supply chain management and producing effective, amazing products at a relatively low cost. And one of the reasons Apple has been able to maintain its margins is because it is so good at producing at cost. And part of it is their ability to integrate a supply chain that involves products of something like 70 different countries. Integrate all that production. Get it to a point where it can be assembled, all being guided by a design developed by Apple and a technology developed by Apple. Integrate it all into a product, whether it's a laptop, whether it's an iPhone, whether it's a computer. And he has that genius, and Steve Jobs saw that, and he hired him, and he found people like Johnny Ives, who has the genius when it comes to design that reflects kind of, I think, Steve Jobs' genius when it comes to that. And if you, Johnny Ives hopefully has, since he's leaving Apple, has developed a team that can do that. We'll see, right? So, reason number one is Steve Jobs hired great people to replace him. That's part of his genius. And it's part of a true lasting legacy of a great business person is that ability. To replace himself with somebody as good as he is. Maybe not one person, maybe it's a team. In Steve Jobs, I think, case, it's a team that can replace the one person. Second reason, Steve Jobs created a fantastic culture, from what I understand, at Apple. A culture that, while very, very segregated in business units, secretive, very, very open to innovation within your business unit. You could question, you could ask, you could question, you could challenge, So a real environment that produces great leaders, great ideas into the future. So I think those are two reasons. I think the third is maybe challenging the assumption. Do we know that Apple is still as great without Steve Jobs? That is, there's a sense in which it's incredibly successful still, but it's riding on. Apple really hasn't introduced a new product since Steve Jobs, I don't think. I think every product that it's introduced since Steve Jobs died, he was involved in one way or another in designing and having a vision about. So a lot of it is tinkering, improving, and reducing costs, the reducing cost of production while increasing quality. And the question is, does Apple still have the genius, which was Steve Jobs' genius, to really revolutionize the market. Really revolutionize the market. And we don't know that. I don't think we know that. It could be that Apple's not as good without Steve Jobs because it can't do that. It can't invent a completely new thing or create a completely new thing from a bunch of things that really exist. Like the iPhone was not a completely new thing, but in its conception, it was completely new. In its functionality, it was completely new. Can Apple do that? I don't know. We will see. We will see if it can. So that's my explanation for Apple. All right. Is there any sensible logic at all in Trump saying he wants the U.S. to buy Greenland? Now, I don't even know how to answer this question because you're using logic and Trump in the same sentence. And I think that, obviously that can't work, right? So does Trump has any logic behind wanting to buy Greenland? I don't know. I doubt it. Did he say it in the context of, I don't know, making fun of global warming? Did he say it in the context of making fun of Denmark, which Greenland is part of Denmark, although the Norwegians claim Greenland, so there's a bit of a conflict between Greenland and Norway Norway and Denmark over Greenland. I guess which Viking family discovered Greenland and which Viking family, because there's only one family, I think, on Greenland. It's so small population-wise. It's massive land-wise. Why would he even say this? In what context was he saying it? Is Denmark selling? I doubt it. Greenland, it turns out, is incredibly valuable, particularly if the glaciers melt. There's enormous value in the glaciers melting in Greenland because it turns out that Greenland, and this is maybe what Trump was referring to, but I doubt, if there was logic there, I guess somebody says 2046 says the U.S. has been trying to buy Greenland for a while, way before Trump. I didn't know that. I've never heard of that before. But the value of Greenland is its natural resources. And the primary natural resource in Greenland is it's what are called rare metals. These are metals that are used in computers and stuff. And the big supply of rare metals today, the biggest supplier by far in the world that dominates the industry is China. And it's one of the things that China can hold over the U.S. in a trade war is rare metals. Our computer industry depends on rare metals, and yet China is one of the few places on the planet that has them. Mongolia has rare metals, but they have not yet created an effective, efficient industry to mine them and to deliver them and to export them. And Greenland has a lot of rare metals, and the challenge there is to get to it. It's very expensive because it's all under glaciers, under ice. In spite of the name, Greenland is not green. Greenland is white. It is covered by snow and ice most of the year, or almost all the for most of Greenland is covered with ice and snow all year. It's very much like the the Arctic. So I guess the United States would like it for the sake of these rare metals. My guess is it has some strategic value in terms of access to the Arctic Circle, which the Russians have really invested a lot in trying to secure for themselves. There's also a lot of natural resources in the Arctic Circle, primarily oil in the ocean. But I don't know. On the chat they say this has been in play for a long time. I've never heard that. Greenland is colder than Iceland. It's covered with more ice and snow. Iceland is not particularly green because Iceland is a cold desert kind of. It looks deserty because it's so, things don't grow. I don't know why anybody lives in these places. I don't understand why people live in Michigan and in Minnesota and places like that. It boggles the mind. But Greenland, you have to be a Viking, I guess, to live in places like that. Iceland is volcanic rock, yes. It's beautiful. Iceland is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I've been there. I was there once. I gave some talks, and I got a chance to drive around, and It's just amazing. And I've just been watching a TV show that's on Prime Video, called Trapped. It's an Icelandic detective story. Each season is one kind of story. It's about a small town in the north of Iceland. And it's very good. I really enjoyed it. And it's got a lot of shots of the scenery of Iceland. And it's really dramatic and beautiful. And it's Iceland is quite dramatic and quite amazing. I think Jennifer has taken offense to my, objecting to the cold in Michigan. But it's, she might get back at me because I might be giving a talk in Michigan in January. So that'll get me, get back at me. So yeah, that's all I can think of in terms of Greenland and Greenland population is, I don't know, it's very small. It's less than 800,000. 800,000, I mean, Iceland is less than 800,000. Iceland, I think, is more like 500,000 to 600,000. They told me in Iceland when I was there that there's an app, that young people have this app. And you put somebody's name in the app, you can figure out whether they're your relative or not. And you use this in dating because everybody's related and you want to know how closely related. Because it's all one big family, right? It's all one big group that came to Iceland from probably Norway at some point. Somebody says 350,000, I think, in Iceland. So they have an app to figure out who's a relative and who's not, so that they don't fall in love with their first cousin or something. So I thought that was pretty funny. But this series called Trapped, which is a crime series, deals a lot with family and family issues and family conflict, which I think is very relevant in a small place like Iceland, in a cold place like Iceland, in a remote place like Iceland. So I recommend it, Trapped, on Prime Video, Amazon, the Amazon thing. Okay. Oh my God, we got so many questions now. Okay. You mentioned before that oligopolies would not exist in a free market. Can you elaborate on this, and how do you explain Rockefeller having 90% of the oil market at one point during the Gilded Age? And then there's another question here. Ayn Rand did not admire Rockefeller, as she said herself. I don't remember that. So he's just zero-sum to her in spite of all his achievement, from hero to zero, really? I don't remember Ayn Rand saying that she did not admire Rockefeller. So, I mean, I certainly admire Rockefeller. And I don't believe Rockefeller had what you're calling an oligopoly, although technically what Rockefeller had, technically based on, I think, silly economics, he had a monopoly, because 90% would define a monopoly. But I don't believe that is a monopoly. So I don't believe you define a monopoly based on the market share that you have. I think monopolies and oligopolies are defined based on whether they have government protection or not. As long as they don't have government protection, there's always competition. Always competition. So, for example, we learn in economic textbooks that if you have a 90% share of a market, then you're a monopolist, and therefore what you do is you raise prices and lower quality because you have no competition. So what the hell? You raise prices above your marginal cost. You raise them as high as you can, so that up to the point where you don't lose enough customers, so you're maximizing your profit in that way. And Rockefeller didn't do that. And you can go back and look at the evidence. There's plenty of evidence, and I highly, highly recommend. There's an essay that Alex Epstein wrote on Rockefeller. Just put Alex Epstein and John D. Rockefeller into Google search, and you'll find it. But also, I would recommend The Myth of the Robber Barons. The Myth of the Robber Barons, which is a book by Robert, I'm not sure if it's Robert, it's Folsom, by Folsom, who describes what happened. And if you look at the numbers, Rockefeller decreased prices every single year and increased quality every single year, while he had 90+% of the oil refining capacity in the United States. So he was, they tell us, a monopolist. It didn't behave like a monopolist. In my view, he wasn't a monopolist. He was in competition. It's just the competition was unseen, because the competition was the potential of somebody to outmaneuver him, to lower prices below his, to create a product better than his. And that was in the 1870s. And at the time in the 1870s, he was producing oil primarily Burton Folsom, B-U-R-T-O-N, Folsom, F-O-L-S-O-M. That is, I recommend all his books. Myth of the Robber Baron is the best, but they're all excellent. Everything he wrote is worth reading if you're interested in economic history. Anyway, why did he do it? Because he knew there was competition. And who competed him out of what he was producing? Well, if you look at the 1870s, and Rockefeller's producing this oil, he's refining oil, and he's refining oil into what? Into kerosene. And what's the kerosene being used for? Lighting. And who competed him out of the business of lighting? Thomas Edison. Electricity. Now, what bureaucrat, what judge in a court, what jury in a court would have predicted that? Would have predicted that while he was charging what he was charging for oil, doing what he was doing, lowering prices every year, there was somebody who was going to outcompete him in a completely different industry, but outcompete him out of that business. And by the way, by the time Rockefeller's Standard Oil was broken up, I think it was the 1920s, he had gone from 90% to 25% or something in the 20s, not because of government, not because of antitrust, not because he was broken up, because he was only broken up in the 20s, but because of competition. And he knew it. So he had to be on his toes. He had to keep fighting. He had to keep innovating. He was one of the most innovative entrepreneurs in all of human history. He should be massively admired. Now, maybe there's some reason not to admire him that has to do with his personal life. I don't know. But as a businessman, he's one of the true greats. One of the true greats. Didn't take government subsidies, was not involved in trying to, in cronyism. Right? And he was one of the giants. So what if he had 90%? My point is not that a business will not dominate an industry. My point is that domination is not bad, just like Google today dominates search. But how much does it charge you for that search? Zero. And if you think it has a monopoly over internet advertising, but that is too narrow. Does it have a monopoly over advertising, over marketing? No. People have lots of choices when it has to marketing and advertising, even on the internet. But yes, it has some ridiculous percentage of all that. So, Liberal Deutsch, you'll have to give me a reference for where Ayn Rand says she didn't like Rockefeller. I don't remember that. I'm not saying it's not true, I just don't remember it. So, that's my answer on monopolies. And I've done a number of videos on monopolies. You might want to search Yaron Brook monopoly, and you'll get, generally, if you have questions, a lot of times if you just type my name in and the question, I've already answered it for a lot of it, right? Could any pre-Columbian Native American tribes be described as successful socialist or communist economies? No. No, I don't think they were socialist or communist. I don't know how you would apply these concepts that really assume a modern economy. They assume production, which didn't happen in those pre-Columbian tribes. They had tribal cultures in the sense of sharing. Were they successful? By what standard? By the standard of individual freedom? No. By the standard of individual happiness? No. By the standard of wealth? No. By the standard of individual wealth? No. By what standard would they be successful? I don't know any standard. Of human sacrifice, which many of them practiced? That's not consistent with, but put it this way, my standard is human flourishing. And no pre-Columbian society was successful by the standard of human flourishing, including in the West. Greece, Florence in a certain period, Venice in a certain period, but very little human flourishing was going on. All right. We're getting more questions. Let's see. Did you see Prime Minister of India's comments on wealth creation today? Is there any hope for India? I did not. Is there any hope for India? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't see why not. There's hope for anybody. But, I mean, my impression generally of the Prime Minister of India is that he's a nationalist. He is in a negative sense, he is a central planner. He's a Trump-like character who wants to plan the economy. Now, maybe he said something positive about wealth creation today, but what are his actions? Is he truly freeing up the Indian economy? Is he truly opening it up? I've seen the opposite in many respects. But again, I'm not an expert, far from an expert on India. But his nationalist agenda is suspicious. And his protectionist policies are suspicious. But maybe I'm wrong. I'll try to look for the quote about wealth creation from the Prime Minister of India. Can you elaborate on the many ways in which the FDA restricts the market functions of U.S. healthcare and interferes with every decision we make in healthcare realm? Yeah, I mean, the FDA is responsible for drugs, for medical devices, and to some extent for medical procedures, including whether you can use your own stem cells to inject back into your own body, which stem cells are allowed and which are not. And in every one of those, the FDA restricts innovation, makes it unbelievably expensive to innovate, makes it amazingly expensive to bring a drug to market, reduces the incentive for drug companies to even try. In certain areas of medicine, they generally have an attitude of, we just won't approve drugs in these areas. For example, life extension. Life extension research is probably being set back by 30 years, over the last 30 years, by the fact that the FDA just won't consider drugs whose main purpose is life extension. The only, lifestyle enhancing drugs they will consider are things that have to do with sex. What do you call the drug that for men, the blue pill, I guess. What's it called? This is me getting old. Anyway, Viagra. So they approve drugs like Viagra, but they won't approve drugs that actually that in other ways enhance human life. They don't approve drugs that extend human life. So people don't research it. So people don't invest huge amounts of money. So VCs don't invest in those companies. So it's real. And of course, medical devices, the same thing. So there are whole areas in which there would be innovation in that nobody is investing in. So it's the unseen. It goes back to Henry Hazlitt. Economics is the science of the unseen. And the unseen when it comes to the FDA is all the things we don't have. All the areas that we're not invested in. All the products, procedures, and drugs that nobody did and nobody tried and nobody engaged in because they knew there's no point. And then all the dollars wasted on stuff that then the FDA didn't permit, and then the drugs that they withdraw from the market. I mean, I think the most famous one is Vioxx, or the most recent one is Vioxx. Vioxx was a drug that for many people who had arthritis, severe cases of arthritis, was the only drug that actually, reduced the pain and made it possible for them to live with the pain. All the other drugs had side effects and didn't work and just were horrible. And Vioxx worked. But it turns out that for a small percentage of the population of people who took Vioxx, suffered from an increase in the possibility of getting heart disease. A small percentage of the people who took Vioxx got heart disease. It made the heart disease worse, I guess. Or made it more, potentially, that they would get more heart disease. Now, in a rational world, that information would be published. Doctors and patients would know that. Doctors whose patients were susceptible to heart disease would take their patients off Vioxx, or at least have a conversation with the patient, everybody else, the doctor would say, look, you're on Vioxx, here are the risks. This is how I assess the risks. It's your decision whether you want to take Vioxx or not and take the risk or not. It reduces your pain, but you're increasing your risk by X amount of percent. But given that you don't, not susceptible to heart disease, it's probably not a big deal. And people would have made decisions for themselves. This is, again, the point I've been trying to make all evening. Socialism destroys or takes out of the realm individual decision-making. But that's what life is about. It's about you choosing the values you pursue, not somebody else choosing them for you. You making decisions about what kind of drugs you take with your doctor. With your doctor. Or not. You want to kill yourself, do it without your doctor. But it's your life. You make decisions. Socialism says you don't get to make decisions for yourself. Socialism rejects the idea of individual decision making in a marketplace. And FDA is a socialist institution in that sense, and it's killed millions of people because of the drugs we don't have. Not to mention, this has been changed a little bit recently under Trump, is that in some cases, drug companies now will be able to give experimental drugs to patients who are dying anyway. In some cases, dying anyway. I mean, why was this ever a question? And why not always? Why not leave it to the doctor and the drug company and the patient? They're dying anyway. But that's the kind of control over the human mind and over human decision-making and over human action that the socialist wants to have. All right, in principle, drugs should be legalized. But as we move closer to universal health care, I'm not sure they are compatible. Under a taxpayer-funded single-payer system, your body, in a sense, no longer belongs to you. Thoughts? I mean, there's a sense in which that's right. And that's why talk about drugs? We should have an enforced diet. I mean, there are a lot of obese people in this country. And socialized healthcare basically means that I, who try to eat well and try to exercise a little bit, not as much as I should probably, I have to subsidize them. And I know when I look at an obese people, I resent them because I'm paying for their health care. This is how socialism creates resentment. Maybe that should be part 3 of my series on socialism. Socialism is the system of resentment and envy. That's good, I'll do that. It causes resentment because now every decision somebody else makes, I pay for. And it's not just drugs, it's what you eat. It's how often you exercise. It's whether you smoke or not. Anything that you do that affects your health. You're speeding and you get into a car accident and you break a bone. I'm paying for it. Yeah, it's why it's so important. It's so important to reject socialism in healthcare because healthcare affects every aspect of our life. And if you socialize it, suddenly we all become our neighbor's keeper in every aspect of our life. But my view is always this. Freedom trumps everything. And even though in a socialized healthcare system I'll be subsidizing somebody's drug use, they still have a right to use drugs. They don't have a right to be subsidized. And I will fight against their right to be subsidized, their entitlement. But they have a right to use drugs. You never advocate for evil for the sake of some good in the long run. And this is my argument about immigration. You don't argue against immigration today because they consume an evil called welfare. You argue against the welfare. Because by that logic, by the logic of we don't want immigrants into the country because we're subsidizing them through welfare, you have to then not be for drug legalization. You have to be not for allowing people to eat what they want. You have to be not for exercise because of welfare, because of the health, the socialized health. You have to advocate, in everything you advocate, you have to advocate for individual rights. Individual rights. You have a right to take drugs. You have a right to commit suicide. You have a right to take drugs that might help you. You have a right to emigrate. I have a right to invite anybody I want into the country. And yeah, welfare and healthcare distort all that. They destroy all that. But that's why we need to fight entitlements. That's why we need to fight socialized healthcare. That's why instead of all this energy, I get so angry. Sorry, I'm really furious. All this energy devoted to fighting against immigrants when we could be devoting all this energy to fighting welfare, to fighting entitlements, to fighting socialized medicine. That's the real evil. That's the real problem. And once you get rid of those, then, yeah, all these other issues take care of themselves. And I never want to be in a position where we socialize medicine, but I'm fighting against drug legalization because I'm endorsing the government dictating a diet or the government dictating exercise because, hey, I'm subsidizing your healthcare, so I have to be a statist now. No. You always fight for individual rights. You never compromise. You never settle. You never, on every issue, it's a question of, are you pro-freedom or against freedom? Are you pro-rights or against rights? Once you're willing to compromise on one of these issues, you've compromised everything. And that's what makes me so mad about the immigration debate. Everybody tells me, oh, you can't have free, open immigration when you have the welfare state. All right, let's fight the welfare state. Stop putting all the energy into fighting immigration. But that's not the real reason why they hate immigrants. It has nothing to do with the welfare state. It has to do with everything else. All right, but we're not going to discuss immigration. What can we expect from Boris Johnson from the UK? I don't know, and I don't think Boris Johnson knows, and I don't think anybody knows. Boris Johnson's a loose cannon. I don't know that he has any firm set of ideas. I will say this, from the limited evidence that I have, and it's limited, he has put together a pretty impressive cabinet from an economic freedom perspective. His Minister of the Exchequer, which is like Treasury Secretary here, is a fan of Ayn Rand. He has got a number of people there in this government who are very pro-free markets. So if Brexit happens and Britain and this government has more control over the UK economy, there is a real chance that he would actually do the right thing. Whereas with what's her name, May, who was prime minister before him, you knew that if Brexit happened, she would mess it up, right? She would mess up the UK economy. I actually think this government is about as free market right now as I think a government can be in the world in which we live. We will see if they can live up to that. We will see if Boris Johnson can live up to that. But certainly there are people in his administration who seem to be, right now, really good. I would like to see a graph comparing the total number of laws and regulations versus GDP per capita. I think it would be easier for people to understand, and only a small number of laws don't damage GDP. Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably information like that. I wouldn't be surprised if you went on Dan Mitchell's website. You could find a graph like that. I would encourage you to look for that. Dan, that's the kind of stuff that he does. It's the kind of stuff he's an expert in, is very good at. What do you make of the libertarian to alt-right pipeline? Why are libertarians joining the alt-right instead of socialists? Well, because libertarians don't have a firm philosophy. They don't have a firm idea about what they believe in. They want change, and they feel like the libertarian movement hasn't delivered change because it's too old-fashioned, intellectual, slow, whatever. But I think it's because they're subjectivists, and I mean, most libertarians are subjectivists, and therefore they're open to whim and what seems cool at the moment. I think a lot of people become libertarians because it's kind of cool. They want to be different, and libertarians are different. They're outside of the mainstream. And they want to be outside of the mainstream, not because they believe in it, but because it's cool to be outside of the mainstream. It's second-handed by being anti-conformist, right? So I think a lot of join the alt-right because that's the cool thing right now. I think they join the alt-right because that's at the fringe, because they seem to be very active, they seem to be very engaged. I think because they didn't have any core beliefs, philosophical beliefs, moral beliefs. What's wrong with the alt-right? If you're not philosophically an individualist, then you're not an individualist. And at the end of the day, so you adopt a certain form of collectivism. And some of them have the delusion that they can bring their libertarianism through the alt-right. Right? They have bought into the idea, I guess, that libertarianism can only be achieved, in a white country and by whites, and all these other ethnic groups are non-libertarian by nature. And I don't know how they've perverted this. So racism somehow, but I think it's their lack of philosophy, their lack of grounding, and that a lot of people are attracted to libertarian ideas because they are fringe. And the fringe now has moved to the alt-right, and they moved with it. Socialism is mainstream. Okay, you don't want to sit so close to the camera. I've moved the camera away quite a bit, and I was hoping that made it better, but I don't know. Okay, sometimes I lean forward or something. Let's see. What do you think of the movement Insulin for All, or any movement of this kind, to force evil big pharma to lower price of insulin? I'm against force, period. And this is just socialism applied to a particular thing. The real question one has to ask, and I talked about this when I criticized Bernie, is why is insulin so expensive? What is that cause insulin to be expensive in the US and not expensive elsewhere? Do we even know that insulin is expensive? Is there anybody who needs insulin that's not getting insulin at a reasonable price? I don't think there's a patent on insulin, so why isn't there competition driving prices of insulin down? Those are the kind of questions one needs to ask to figure out the issue with insulin. But is there even an issue, right? But certainly one never uses force. You don't have a right to insulin. Sorry, you don't. You don't have a right to insulin. You don't have a right to be provided with life support. The right to life does not mean that other people must be sacrificed for you. The right to life means that you have the freedom to act rationally on behalf of your values. That's it. All right. I was a personal trainer. They don't want to do what they need, so now I'm supposed to pay. Why can't they see freedom means you have to think? What happened to freedom? What happened to people? We are meant for resistance. Okay, I'm not sure I understand that. But, the biggest problem in the world today, the reason why socialism is attractive, the reason why statism is attractive, the reason why the alt-right is attractive, is because people are resisting thinking for themselves and taking personal responsibility for themselves. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they be taught a morality that says they don't need to. They shouldn't. Their focus should be on others, and any focus on themselves is selfish and bad. And until we teach people, educate people, to think for themselves, and that it is moral and right and virtuous, that is the essence of virtue, to think for yourself and to act for yourself, then this is what's going to happen. People are not going to take care of themselves. They're not going to think for themselves, which means they won't take care of themselves physically. And we will only get more and more socialism. Socialism eliminates the need for people to think for themselves. So it's an ideal system for those who want to be second-handed, who want to live off of the thinking of others, who want to just cruise, drift in life, who don't want to engage their minds. That's another reason it's immoral. Because it's a social system should be constructed so that moral people can thrive under it. That's why capitalism is moral, because it's a system in which moral people thrive. It's a system built for moral people. Not everybody benefits from capitalism. I like to say the wife beating drunk isn't better off under capitalism materially. And the person who doesn't want to think for himself is spiritually not better off. Materially, I think he is better off. But spiritually, he's not better off. But capitalism is moral because it's built for the moral, the thinkers, the doers, the actors. That's who the system is for. Socialism is a system built for the leeches, the parasites. It's built for the people who don't want to think, who don't want to act on their own behalf, who don't want to take responsibility for their own life, for their own choices, who want other people to make choices for them. Right? Socialism is a system for people who want other people to make choices for them. You know, somebody says, if you don't like socialism, stop driving on the roads. Stop using the fire department. I mean, that's absurd. First of all, the idea that those are socialist is stupid because it's not socialist. Fire departments, by the way, many of them are voluntary private institutions. And none of it, the fact that something is funded by the government doesn't make it socialist. And secondly, the roads would be better if they were privately owned. But the fact is that the government has stolen my money and used it to monopolize roads. And to hell if I'm not going to use them. To hell if I'm not going to use medical services once they monopolize that. Hell if I'm not going to take my Social Security back. Hell if I'm not going to get as much of my money back from the bastards who stole it. So of course I'm going to use the roads. Of course I'm going to use healthcare when they nationalize it. Of course I'm going to use, if I'm going to take my Social Security when they offer it because it's my money and my roads. Hell, these are my roads. That's right. They're not your roads. I paid more taxes than Gray has. The Gray's the guy who asked the question. They're much more my roads than your roads. Get off of my roads. Of course I'm going to use my roads. Of course I'm going to use my health care. Of course I'm going to take my Social Security. You want to turn everything into the roads. You should see the potholes in New York City. One of the richest cities, most successful cities in the world. But because the government owns them, supposedly, they're full of potholes. You want your health care to have potholes. You want your industry to have potholes. You want the rest of the U.S. economy to run like the roads? God help us. The God who doesn't exist. Somebody should help us. How does one actually define real lifeboat emergency situations? Some claim that dirt poor people supporting jihadis for money are in an emergency. I mean, yeah. I don't deny that. I don't deny that some poor people supporting the jihadis are in an emergency. If their alternative is dying of starvation, if their alternative is to be killed by those jihadis, or to support them, I don't put moral blame on them if that's really the situation. I think lifeboat situations is you don't have any choices, where the choices are being taken away from you, either by people or by the context, being on a lifeboat, some bizarre, unusual situation, where the choices don't exist. It's bad and bad. Some is less bad, some is more bad, but everything is bad. And everything is bad is not because of something a situation you created, not a situation, like, I don't know, I stay in the marriage, it's bad, I get divorced from a marriage, it's bad. That's not a lifeboat situation, right? It's not life or death. It's not, but life or death situations that are unusual and created by extreme circumstances. And yeah, I could see some people supporting jihadis because of a lifeboat. I don't think that's a majority. I don't think that's anywhere near a majority of them. I don't think that's why people generally support the jihadi movement. But I could imagine certain people supporting them because of that, but that's a minority. That's not the real issue. If Jeff Bezos read Atlas Shrugged, do you think he would get it? I'd be shocked if Jeff Bezos has not read Atlas Shrugged. I'd be shocked, and I don't know this, but I'd be shocked if Jeff Bezos didn't like Atlas Shrugged. Would he get it? My guess is he hasn't. Not as a fully fledged philosophy and everything it implies. Not in shaping every aspect of your life. I don't know. I don't think so. But I wouldn't be surprised if he got a lot out of it if it inspired him, if he was motivated by it, if he didn't provide motivation. Again, most of the CEOs, I think, over 50% of CEOs of the most successful companies in America, I think, have read Atlas Shrugged and have been inspired by it. And I think that was true a few years ago when I looked over the list, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was true today, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was true of Jeff Bezos. I mean, he lives it in many respects. It seems like he lives it. And he's politically, much more free market. He's a real free marketer when it comes to politics, as far as I can tell. A lot of these, not a lot of them, but a few of these Silicon Valley types who might even vote Democratic are free market types who vote Democratic because they hate the Republicans. And many of them hate the Republicans over things like religion and abortion and gay marriage and things like that. All right, I'm done. An hour and 40 minutes again. Man, you guys worked me hard. You could use the YouTube show reminder function. I do use it. One of the ways you can make sure you have it. Today I had a problem with YouTube, so I used a different mechanism, so maybe you didn't get a reminder, but there's like a bell symbol next to where it's not enough to subscribe anymore to get reminders. You actually have to press this little bell thing on your YouTube channel thing, I don't know, next to the subscribe button in order to get reminders of it. That's my understanding, so please do that. Please, tomorrow on at the same time, same place, Saturday, probably also at 8 p.m. is my expectation. Two more shows, and then I'm gone for 6 weeks, and I don't know how many shows I'm going to do during those 6 weeks. So 2 more shows. One of those will be devoted, I think, exclusively to your questions, so think about questions. Maybe Saturday. I do want to do a show where I analyze Andrew, what's his name? Yang, I think that's his name. But I missed your super chat. What was your other super chat, Alex? Sorry. What was Alex's other super chat? All right, if you put it in the comments, I'll try to do it. Don't forget to share. Don't forget to, particularly short videos, they're great for sharing. And don't forget to support the show. I mean, if you want me to, if I, doing these shows, the revenue that supports these shows are the revenues that you guys provide. So some of you do it through Super Chat. Thank you for doing that. Some of you do it through my website, yaronbrookshow.com/support. Some of you do through subscribestar.com/yaronbrookshow. Any way you do it, I hugely appreciate it, and it's what makes these shows possible. So those of you who don't, thank those of you who thanks those who do, because they're making these shows possible for you to listen to. So thank you all. Again, if I raise an extra $1,000 above where I was a couple of weeks ago when I announced this, then I will stop all ads on all formats for all of my stuff. All of my stuff. Okay, I don't see Alex asking the question. Where's Alex asking the question? You don't have to do a super chat to ask the question. Just put it in the comment. No, I'm wrapping up here, Alex. Email it to me at yaron@yaronbrookshow.com, and I'll just answer it next show. All right, everybody. Thank you. These are fun for me. Hopefully they're fun for you. And I will, you said you recommended a podcast called Meet the Composer. Yes, I saw that, and I'm gonna look into it. Thank you. All right, thanks everybody, and I will see you tomorrow night, I guess, or talk to you tomorrow night. And thank you for all the support. Really appreciate it. Bye, everybody.